All right, good evening, everyone. Tonight, we will continue our budget discussion talks and hopefully come to some numbers by the end of the evening. So we'll have Carl start off and go through some stuff on his end, and then we'll have our discussion.
So, as a follow-up to some of the correspondence that I've sent you, I flagged a couple of capital projects that the council could look at as potential reductions. So this going around now is what's on the screen, so this gives you an idea of potential cuts. Were cutting $85,000 out of the Park and Rec turf replacement project. So as you knew that number when we last met was coming in as being significantly under from what was put in the original budget. I did put an escalator in it reflecting the inflation increase from between when we got it as an ARPA number till the most recent number. So 85 would be the balance that could be cut. Reducing paving by 100,000 puts it at 400, which is the amount we're at now, but that's predicated on the hope that the council will continue to provide the funding that's in ARPA at 300, so that there's 700,000 for paving going into the next year. Eliminating the Public Works roll-off truck. This is meant to provide some flexibility for where we have to go for taking our waste to Essex. We have an older tractor trailer that takes the garbage to the Essex transfer station. This would be not a full-blown replacement, but at least some flexibility until the make the tractor trailer live a little longer. It is an add. We're still going to have to address the tractor trailer. You're not really avoiding anything. It's just building capacity, so you could cut that. And then 50,000 out of the radio project. It's just something we'll have to cross the bridge on in the future unless some grant dollars are provided that round out the balance of the radio project. So some of those projects were proposed to be funded out of fund balance. Some of those projects were proposed to be funded out of taxation. So the chart that you have with the arrows, what's on the screen and what's in front of you, is meant to show you how the dollars now have to flow. So the total capital between the town and the Board of Ed was a little over $4 million. That breaks up into two columns. One that's about 2.2 that was meant to be funded by undesignated fund balance. The other is 1.8, which was meant to be funded by taxation. So the cuts, if you took those cuts that I emailed to you, 135 of that is a reduction off of fund balance, and then 260 of that is a reduction out of what's to be funded from taxation. So the taxation column now totals 1.6 million. I'm assuming that you do not mean to reduce the amount of appropriated fund balance, so that 135,000 needs to be made into a project. In addition to that, it was suggested that an additional 630 should go in as a one-time add to pay for capital projects and not have that paid out of taxation. So that totals 765. So I'm reducing the funded by taxation column by 765,000. So the amount of the capital plan to be funded out of taxation is $849,000. The freed up capacity, as well as the additional fund balance to be appropriated, I'm just plowing numbers at it. So I was splitting the fire apparatus reserve at 159 to be paid for out of this new fund balance that we're using. The balance of 141 would come out of taxation. The fire department personal protective equipment likewise would now move from being 100% funded under taxation to 100% funded under fund balance. Paving, the 400,000 that is left after the reduction, I've moved all of that over to fund balance. Paying for the first installment of reval over to fund balance. First installment of planning of conservation development also over to fund balance. So now the amount of capital to be funded out of fund balance is 2.78 million. And the tax piece is 849. So the new capital total is $3.6 million to be funded after the reduction, but you've pulled down the piece that's meant to be funded out of taxation by adding more and shoving some over. So If you agree with those cuts, you would need to vote to agree with those cuts. You'd also need to agree that you need to appropriate the dollars in some fashion. So this was simply trying to do it as fast as possible and put it at large dollar amounts to soak it up. On the operating side, I did not communicate anything on operating until till today because we were waiting for a presentation from the comptroller regarding where the MERS program is. This is the state employee pension, or it's a state pension plan for municipal employees. We were assuming a certain increase, which is the direction that we had gotten from the comptroller's office last year. They're now giving us the information 2 weeks ahead of time so that we can work it into our budgets. But the required amount to go into MERS is going to go up this year beyond what we were already budgeting. The state assumes a 7% return on their investment. And the last year, they had a negative 8% return on their investment. So that triggers the increase in MERS of what has to be absorbed. So I tried to identify areas to reduce operating generally, but also to reduce operating to now backfill the hole that's being created by the state changing the assumptions on the MERS pension program. So the increase over what we were already told is almost a 10% jump based on what we were given at the end of last year. So I need an additional $63,000 to round out our MERS expense based on numbers that came out at 10 o'clock this morning. So to fill that and still deliver some degree of net budget reduction on the town side of the expenditures, first up is, and this is in the order in which it appears in the budget, under the Planning and Zoning Commission, a reduction in other professional services. This was meant for building a GIS capacity for the town. We're just going to spread it out a little bit longer to get stuff done. There's enough there to deliver the core of the program of what we're looking to accomplish. So the proposed reduction of $5,000 to that account. WPCC, other professional services, this is a proposed $1,000 reduction. In the past, we budgeted about $10,000 for the engineer that supports the commission. The actual spend has been a little lower than that, so $9,000 will meet the needs of the commission for the upcoming fiscal year. Under DPW, as I noted previously, you can reduce the landfill expense by $3,340. This is the difference between what the assumed tip fee coming out of Mira was going to be versus the rates that were actually approved. So when the budget was built, it assumed $120 a ton was going to be the tip fee. The approved rates came in at $116 a ton. So that reduction you can take as a cut. Salt and sand is a small reduction under the assumption that since we've had such a light year, there's capacity to use what we've got in the current budget, fill up the salt barn, and then be that much more prepared going into the new fiscal year. EDC, this is reduction in hours to the part-timer that was meant to support their activities. I took up both the rate of pay and the hours that the position would work. So this is scaling back the assumed hours that this position would work going into the new fiscal year, but keeping the higher rate of pay. Contingency, cutting that by $50,000, which is going to require fiscal discipline going into the new fiscal year, that we stay within the town's budget and be mindful of requests that come in that have not already been baked into the budget in order to make sure that we balance at the end of the year. So you can cut it. That's going to come with the council not necessarily approving everything if we start to get tight as the fiscal year goes on. Other reductions under general government other, reduction of bank fees by $7,500. With higher interest rates, compensating balances now picks up instead of fees, so it's not unreasonable to assume that our bank fees are going to drop given where interest rates are now and where they're projected to go. Town council, town attorney, this is a reduction of that amount from 110 by 15,000. Looking at actual utilization of where we're at, that's probably a number that's achievable, depending on where litigation lines up. And then beautification, a cut of $746. It was in the budget at $2,500. The reduction of $746 delivers their core program and just cuts into the nice-to-have aspect of what they were looking for. So that's a reduction of $89,700. I need to take $63,000 of that to backfill the MERS hole that opened up, which leaves a net reduction to the town side of the budget of $26,706.
Questions, comments?
So, did I miss where you explained why you made this $89,000 worth of cuts when MERS is predicted to be 63,000?
Why I overcut? To provide a path to reduce the town side of the budget. So I needed to fill the hole that MERS was creating just to get to what I proposed to you initially, and then there's a little extra to try and bend the cost curve down on the town side. It's not a significant amount, but it's an amount that actually impacts the mill rate.
Makes sense.
Is there
Yeah,
any
because I
way we
kind
can
of
be
need to see that
creative
GIS money go
to
away.
possibly use some of the ARPA money to offset the increase in the pensions?
No, I would not do that. ARPA is one-time money, and you should not use one-time money for an operating expense. You will create a structural deficit going into the next year.
I was hoping it could be used as a catch-up.
So you took the taxpayer burden down by $1 million, is that how I read it?
I think
It was 1.874 and now it's 1, that looks like. Actually, that's 854,000.
I mean, the biggest change was on the capital side with the addition of fund balance, additional fund balance, and then appropriating what you,
So 630 in fund balance, 395 in cuts on the capital side,
correct.
and then net.
So the net is, because you still want to keep the fund balance in as a part of revenue, is that the reduction in the actual expenditure of capital dollars is 395. The amount that's required to fund that out of taxation has been dropped dramatically because fund balance is soaking up more of that. But whether that's sustainable is another matter, but at least it's, as was stated, doing it as a one-time thing.
So what you said was right. I think, Terry, it's about $1 million, and that would lower the mill rate. I think you did some math already, right? From 30 point. Well, you tell me, to 30.4.
Yeah, so the new mill rate based on applying additional fund balance, plus the cut to capital, plus this proposed operating cut delivers a mill rate that would come in at 30.18 mils, which is 0.35 mils over the current mill rate, which my math came out to be a little shy of 1.2% tax increase.
Is there still a variable on the insurance?
Healthcare is something that the superintendent and I are monitoring and want to be comfortable that the numbers that we're getting are going to be real numbers and it's not going to be a change. So just like hesitation of wanting to have a real firm MERS number before giving them other cuts to make sure that I don't have a hole open up on the budget. Last year, a number was telegraphed by the comptroller's office for where healthcare was going to be, and then it came in 2 percentage points higher, which required a little bit of scrambling to make sure that the budgets could work. So I think we're prepared to have that conversation in April after the public hearing for what that's going to look like, to make sure that we've got numbers that are reliable for where the partnership program would go in the next fiscal year. I don't want to give you a potential reduction only to have to claw back something. And again, this is just to tee up the expenditures, not the revenue, the expenditures for a public hearing to get the public's feedback on the direction the budget is headed. Then in April, after the public hearing, you then meet again for further budget revisions. Then you pass that out as the process to go forward for the public vote.
So if we go through all this, we still then have to reappropriate the 135, correct?
Correct. So you still need to tie those additional fund balance dollars to projects.
Okay.
So I've given you a potential way to spend those dollars in as few line items as possible. And I think the actual request from Mr. Donovan was $630,155. I cut out the $155 because it wasn't material to the mill rate, and it made the math easier to do the capital plan. We don't have capital projects in the $155 increment.
Sure.
We don't have big projects in the $155.
Anybody else? A lot of numbers going on over there. A lot of calculations. Chris got out the calculator.
Yeah. I'm just doing, if we're 0.35 mil over, so just for a bogey to understand, if we wanted to keep the mill rate exactly the same, it's another $605,000, $386. Not to say we do, it's helping me to sort of understand all the different numbers. Bogey.
I mean, again, I think our direction has to stay to the point that this continual, no increase on the budget is, going to be a problem down the road. So if we continue to try to shoot to that number year after year, it eventually is going to catch up to us. So I think, getting it to a number that we're comfortable with, because again, at the end of the day, it's got to be a number that the council has consensus that we're comfortable with as far as what that increase would be, with as little pain as possible to the public. I mean, that's kind of what we have to shoot for. I mean, I think, education-wise, I think we told them 2.5, I think is what the council suggested that we would like them to be at. So, we have that, and then, obviously we have this information here, some, appropriate on the 135, these little projects, but, I mean, overall, if we're comfortable with the 630 additional capital that then is proposed, and, redirecting that and doing what we need to do, I think that's, kind of, again, what we need to have that consensus on as we move forward.
We are aware of revenues coming in, though. We also know that right now we're sitting at 2.1 million above what we had expected.
I'm not following that one.
Well, according to Sue's last financial report, that's 100,000 less in expenses and 2.1 million higher in revenues as of February.
Surplus.
Surplus.
Town surplus for the.
And we know that's there.
What I was thinking is, I agree with what you say, Chris. Like, I think there's two ends of the spectrum, like to overspend out of the undesignated fund just because it's there is too much. But on the other end of the spectrum, we have to also look at, what that undesignated fund is and why it's going in there. So when we keep the mill rate, like for this last year, we keep the mill rate the same and values of the houses go up, then there's overtaxation. Not that we tried to do that, it's just a function of the existing situation. And I understand values go down as well. But so there's a surplus that went into the undesignated fund of like 800 or 900,000. And so what I sort of was looking at this before tonight, before all this, is we have that long projected amount of what's gonna come out of the undesignated fund, and it's like 2 million, and we've said it's gonna run out over a certain amount of time. But if we keep having surpluses and addition in there, at least for this year, it's a net, you know, that really we're taking 2 point something out, but we might put 2 point something in, so we really aren't taking any money out of that undesignated fund. So I think it's a balance. I mean, Dennis came up with a number, 600,000, so it's not like we're not asking to take any additional money out of there, but, you know, I'm looking at the number where we are, which is good, and I'm also looking at what the number would be to keep the mill rate constant. And the difference, like I said, is another 600,000.
We'll just point out for you that the town's fund balance policy is pegged at 15% of expenditures. So if expenditures are not cut, then your 15% is constantly growing. So even though you're delivering a 0% tax increase by appropriating more fund balance, you're not changing the overall size of the appropriation for the purposes of that calculation, which means your 15% for next year is going to be even more and require more money than it does now, because you're allowing the budget to grow without making any reductions in expenditures. So that's the other thing you need to be mindful of. If you're going to step on the gas for fund balance, you're going to upsize what 15% looks like in next year and the following years, because you're not reducing the amount of expenditures.
So what you said is 15% of 61 million is more than 15% of 60 million. I got it. But we're not anywhere near 15%, right? What's our undesignated fund balance now?
Currently, it's 28%.
And
And
we
what's
have-
proposed in here takes you down to 23%.
The next point you made was that we've tapped the undesignated fund balance over the last 3 years more significantly than we have in probably a decade. That's true. But we're spending capital in an unprecedented way too. Over the last 3 years, we've probably spent $8 million in capital. So they matched. Just facts. I'm not making any particular point there. It's just putting out additional information to what you said. I'm of the mind, it seems to me that the fund balance will grow based on the excess that Carrie just pointed out with the current fiscal year. And as we talked, we shouldn't consider the current fiscal year because we're only 8 months in it, and we don't know that that $2 million will still be there in the lapsing of the next 4 months. But if you did consider that, so this is a different conversation than, maybe this meeting is supposed to talk about our expenditures and what we're spending this year, and not management of the undesignated fund balance.
Thank you. Our workshops in the very recent past that's been our conversation. And I'm just trying to, I'm not saying that, I'm trying to get people to kind of slowly walk away from that, to understand that going forward will be the issue.
Yeah.
There's going to be that issue. Things will change. We can't guarantee anything down the road, whether we're going to have a surplus or we can't guarantee any of that. But so that's sort of the issue that I look at, is that if there's no guarantee of any of that. The unfunded, the undesignated balance, will it continue to grow? We don't know. We are where we are. The 15% is what we're needed for bond ratings. We drop below 15%, we have bigger problems.
Yeah.
Because it affects our bond rating, it affects our debt service. That's an entirely different number that's going to affect our overall budget. So, the way I look at it is, you don't want to cripple yourself. Yes, I understand people are struggling. I understand people, everything is costing more money. We're talking about that. We've been talking about it for 3 years now. As we went through COVID, we have to at some point have that discussion and start talking about, the opposite side of the line items, to make sure that what we're doing going forward puts us in a good path. I don't want to see us go 3 years down the road and say, oh, by the way, we got a 10% tax increase. Because that's possibly what you would be looking at if you continue, using.
My prediction is the opposite. We saw in 2010, when the grand list dropped, because housing values dropped, then the mill rate went way up. And we're going to have a reval in 2025, and I expect values to go up. properties have gone up in value, and you'll see the mill rate drop in 2025.
Right, I mean,
But
but
who knows?
again, that's what I mean, those
We
are,
drop.
yes, we hope, yes. Do we know? No. So that's
Right, agreed.
all I'm trying to say. We're just trying to, get it to the point where, we're not crippling people.
In the year that you're implementing reval, you normally would be looking to apply some fund balance in that particular year for those people that are gonna have a disproportionate hit because that once every 5 years valuation of their property and whatever the drop in the mill rate is, their tax levy may be out of line. So you normally hold some fund balance for the year you implement reval in order to provide an additional cushion to make sure that you don't have this shock to some people. The second year, everything should be stabilized at that point in time, and then you start to roll forward until the next 5-year cycle.
So the point there is that the undesignated fund balance might be a little higher than 15% in a year heading into reval to cushion the blow for people in the year that occurs.
And you don't want to be exactly at 15, because that's how the town lost its bond rating with Moody's, is you bumped along at about 15, then you slid below for 3 years, just sort of this skate below, and Moody's looked at it one way, and then they said, we're going to drop you. And the town lost its bond rating, and we had to shift over to Standard & Poor's.
So I give you credit for that. By the way, I wanted to say that I give you and the Board of Education credit for putting together great budgets. I think you guys did a great job. It's new for me, so I just went through it for the first time, and I was impressed. Nice job. And you do not want to breach 50%. I'm 100% with you. Not even close. I don't even want to get
Right,
close.
the other reason you don't want to be close is if there's some sort of, hurricane, any sort of, thing that we have to deal with, we pay that,
Yeah.
town pays for that, then we get refunded a portion from FEMA however many years down the road. So you don't want to be at, you don't want to be close to that number.
So 15% of 60 million is 9 million. It's not 18.
Yeah, I'm the slowest boat in this. I'm just paying, you know that all the time. I'm the guy that always gives them the headache. I have a little problem here because up on top it says we started with total capital of $4,025,273 when we ended up with all these discussions. And then I asked if we could use another 630 from unappropriated funds. In my estimation, that would have made the total capital, when you come out of that, $3,395,273. Yet after all this, I come down here, it still ends up $3,630,273. Somehow, I just have a little problem off the top of my head, saying how if I took 630 from 4 million, how I end up with 3,600,000.
So the 4 million gets split between what's proposed to be funded out of undesignated fund balance and what's meant to be funded out of taxation. So that split is in your budget book. So the fund balance piece was initially proposed at 2.151 million.
Right.
And the taxation piece is proposed to be funded by $1,874,273. From that, I reduced both of those by the 395 that I communicated to you previously. So 260,000 of that comes out of taxation, 135 of that comes out of fund balance. So the new amount to be funded out of fund balance becomes $2,016,000. The amount to be funded out of taxation is $1,614,273. You then need to reappropriate projects funded by taxation to be now funded out of fund balance to the 135 that you cut, because otherwise you have to cut the revenue. And then the additional 630 that you asked for. So then that's $765,000 worth of projects now need to be assigned to fund balance that were previously assigned to taxation. So I'm pulling down the taxation amount by 765, which leaves the net to capital expenditure to be funded out of taxation at 849,273. The 765 gets added back in to the 2,016,000. So that gets me to $2,781,000. then $2,781,000 plus $849,273 gets me the new sum of $3,630,273.
So what he did was, he cut the,
That's why I put the arrows all over there.
yeah.
That's what he's getting confused with. There's a lot of arrows going on.
Too many arrows.
Where am I going? Where am I looking?
So Dennis, you're at 3395, right?
Yeah,
That's because you took the 4025 and subtracted your 630?
yeah.
So he added the 630, he did do what you said, but then of the cuts that he came up with, 135 of it, he prorated to the fund. You see the 135, he reduced the amount going to the fund by 135. So you really didn't get 630 upper, you got 630 minus 135.
Okay, that's what I want to hear. So I didn't get my full 630,000 taken off.
You're doing
I got
voodoo math with
500
him
and
now.
some
Don't
odd.
worry, you didn't get everything.
Mr. Teskey, because I kind of figured I'm not that stupid yet. So,
Yeah.
in other words, the actual figure that we're reappropriating or adding to what we had is 630 minus 135.
You're not, because we now take fund balance as a revenue, when you appropriate more fund balance, you're not cutting the
Okay, I
expenditure.
understand now. I just thought I was going crazy because they said, no, no.
You're
bringing
increasing
it
revenue
home.
and
Don't
you're
confuse
keeping
me.
expenditures the same.
No problem. Gotcha. Thank you very much.
Okay,
So,
Yeah.
I got a question, Carl. I probably should have asked you this a long time ago, but I think I need to be educated a little bit. So our mill rate, I have no idea what a mill rate should be. So I Googled Old Saybrook, Westbrook, Killingworth, Madison. Old Saybrook was 20.08, Westbrook was 25, Killingworth was 26.72, and Madison was 29.42. Guilford was 32.62. So why do you think, or why should I know that their mill rates are lower than our mill rate? Is there any-
Okay, so there's a lot that goes into a mill rate. So to look at over the shoulder and look at another town and say, well, they're lower, therefore that's the right number is not a fair way to look at it in any way, shape, or form. You cannot compare us to Westbrook. They don't have a police department. We have a police department. So your mill rate is what your revenues are, what your expenditures are, and the amount of expenditures that are not covered by other revenues that you get with the state grants and aid or locally generated revenue. The delta between that is how much money you have to raise in taxes. Your grand list then drives what the value of a mill is, and that's how you come up with the mill rate. So I wouldn't compare us to a small town like Killingworth or Westbrook, where they don't have the services that we have. They don't have the positions we have. They don't do what we do. That's not really a fair comparison because it's a smaller town. They're servicing far fewer people than we are. Those two in particular don't have police departments. They don't have full-time staff doing the stuff that we have here because either they don't do it or it's a part-timer or something like that. So you have to look at everything, not just one factor. You have to look at the size of their grand list, the size of their budget, and what services they offer. So there's an awful lot you have to look at. Comparing us to a Guilford gets you more in the ballpark. Comparing us to a Madison with a much higher grand list than us, there's the same degree of complexity. They have a police department, we have a police department, but their grand list is so much larger than ours. So if their grand list is larger, they can have a lower mill rate. And this town's grand list didn't grow for 10 years. They recovered from the 2008 downturn. Clinton didn't recover from the 2008 downturn for 10 years. So they went down and then they came right back up and they grew their grand list. You grow your grand list, that means you pull down the mill rate.
Carl, what does it mean that our grand list is growing? Our mill rate is growing?
The grand list is growing means the base of
No, I'm sorry, I
taxation in the
understand that.
town is
Sorry,
growing.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be that dense. But our grand list is growing, our mill rate is growing, and our undesignated fund is growing.
As I said last year, your undesignated fund balance is growing based on a number of one-time expenditure or revenue and expenditure, under expenditures. So we went through COVID where the town and the Board of Ed did not deliver services the way we traditionally have, and there were savings that were turned back to the town. Revenue side, you sold the old Morgan. We do that once. We do not do that repeatedly. A number of one-time FEMA reimbursements came in that went back years. So we got monies that came in that were not predictable, that they are not things that are going to come in every single year. You had a large growth that took place because of a whole bunch of one-time stuff. Once you get into a year of normalcy, then you have to see what your numbers are going to look like. The last book, the sheet I gave you on how the fund balance grew was the last year of COVID for how the Board of Ed did its operations. The last year of COVID for how we did our operations. So again, it's an abnormal year. There's nothing in there that's structural. The only thing that's remotely structural is the size of contingency, where that's a function of, do we have an emergency that requires us to spend it or not? The rest of those things are all going to be one-timers, not things you should be banking on being repeat activities.
So, what we did with those big fund balance withdrawals is we spent it on capital, and rightly so. And so then the thing that I would look to is in the fund balance, and maybe we should take a portion of that undesignated fund balance and designate it, right, for capital reserve or some other type of fund. That's probably more be a good conversation to have.
Well, I mean, we're spending an awful lot of time talking about one aspect of the budget, but if the council really wants to get into this, you should dedicate specific time talking about how you want to manage the resource. Previously, I put out that we should have some sort of fund to be ready for grants. Grants have moved from being soft matches to hard dollar matches. We don't have the hard dollar match unless it's appropriated. So that makes it more difficult to be competitive for grants. Having a reserve that would fund that would be helpful. A coastal resiliency reserve is something the bond rating agencies are constantly looking for. Branford created it, they started the wheels rolling, and now it's something every coastal town in Connecticut has to respond to of, what are you doing for coastal resiliency? Do you have a reserve? Some towns don't create them, some towns do create them, some create them and don't fund them, so it's all over the ballpark. That would be something that would help lock in where we are, demonstrating to the bond markets that we are prepared for potential issues. Sinking funds for capital reserves is another way of how you could use those dollars to have another resource that meets the needs of capital as the town goes forward. We have an awful lot of capital needs because things were not done. So there's a pile of deferred maintenance before you get to the new stuff. We've got a lot that has to be addressed in the town's pipeline.
So do we have a sinking fund now for capital?
No, closest thing you have to it is the undesignated, or the non-lapsing at the Board of Ed, which was specific to dollars for either capital or unanticipated special ed expense. And that was created, and that's the aspect of it that could be used for capital is the closest you have to what you could call a sinking fund. We have no other sinking funds. How much is in there?
Yeah.
As of the audit, $539,268.
That's the schools?
Yes.
So if you look at the.
It's not the schools, it's for the schools. The town council approves those expenditures.
So if you look at FY '25, you gave us a 10-year capital forecast. There's a lot of capital in FY '25.
There's a lot of capital coming because you can kick the can for so long, but you can't kick it forever.
But, no, don't we have money also like in sort of a sinking fund for that fire apparatus?
That's a reserve service.
That's a reserve within the capital
It's called reserve
fund.
fund, but it's the same thing.
It's within the capital fund.
Right.
So it's built through tax dollars or fund
So when I'm
balance.
looking at the big capital expenditure in FY '25, it's deposits into that reserve for the apparatus.
There is deposits
It's
already.
in there.
Yeah. So it's frozen in undesignated surplus, is what he's trying to say.
Yeah, there's.
Where
Allocated, I mean, that's
it's
what- right.
built up.
It's allocated
It's
within,
allocated
within,
for the
Good,
within
it's allocated
capital.
for fire, so
Encumbered, right?
when they get around to buying that truck, the bike isn't gonna be that bad. We were starting these funds, and I don't know how we got off the subject, or got away from them. A couple years ago, we had talked about sinking funds.
Yep.
Because years ago, we had them in this town. We had them for reval, we had them from trucks, we had them for about 6 or 7 different
keys?
departments, and we were getting them built up pretty
Jingle
good.
keys.
Of course, people would die because the way we
All right,
did it
let's
was we
circle
would have
back.
to surplus every year.
Let's circle back. Let's talk about it. Let's talk about this
Okay,
year.
so let's
Here we go.
circle back.
So we have things that have been proposed that are on the table. So those are the discussions we need to have tonight to see if that's something that we want to do and move forward with, and then come up with a, final number, final mill rate, if that's kind of where we're headed with this, so that we have some sort of numbers that we can.
It's not final.
I mean, not final, I mean, just something that we can look at and put it, and have a number. So obviously, these suggested cuts, the budget reductions that he gave us, I mean, we need to get some sort of, some response on that to see if this is something that we're comfortable with, if we're good with all those, and then we would need a motion to move forward with those.
So far, all we've discussed is the town budget, correct?
Right. So this is the town operating, the cuts that, or the budget reductions that he gave us to cover the MERS increase.
Yeah.
So the part-time salary for the EDC, so you just reduced the hours?
Yes, I increased the hours and
Increased
increased
the
the
hours.
rate of pay.
Okay.
So in this case, to try and find pots of money, and there's no
Okay.
person tied to that, I took the hours back down to what it was assumed for this fiscal year.
Okay.
One other question on the contingency, you're gonna take 50 out of the contingency, what does that leave in the contingency?
There's a certain amount that I'm going to need for salary settlements in contract negotiations, and then now a smaller piece for us to manage if there's unanticipated stuff that pops during the year. That's why we have a
There's a line in
contingency.
there for 390 right now, isn't there, Carl? So this would bring it to 340. The only thing I have a problem with here is I really liked the sound of Abby being able to work with enhanced GIS permissions or levels or whatever that was. The rest of what you have in here looks good to me. I don't like taking 50,000 from contingency, but I really would like to see Abby keep that GIS $5,000.
That's our decision, so.
Yeah, that's
I
fine.
agree.
What about that 50,000 for contingency? Does that seem too aggressive?
But don't forget, the more we reduce, then that's gonna have an overall impact.
Well, this is
'Cause we're-
to fill a gap.
Right, but we're
This
still-
doesn't actually exist at this moment.
Right, but what he's doing is he's covering that.
I get that.
And then, so we're still 26 to the positive.
I know, that's what I.
So, but I mean, right,
So
but we
you-
don't want to be,
so you
ultimately,
take
that has an impact. So
Could it be, is it gonna be more than 63, do you think?
No, that's the official number.
So, okay, thank you.
So that reduces it by 26,000 so far.
Correct, if we put the 5 in, we're down to 21 change for the GIS. I mean, touching.
Well, we're down to cutting 84,000.
No.
Yes, it would be
Yeah,
84,000
Then
in
you got
cuts.
63.
So the net budget
that's
change
what-
would be
that's right.
21,000.
Right, the budget change would be 21, right?
Yeah,
So, that increase in pensions.
that's just personal, that's just my feeling about, I know how inadequate our GIS system is, and that anything we can do to enhance it and to examine it is of benefit to any growth in Clinton, frankly. So-
I'm good with that.
I wouldn't have any problem
Yeah.
adding that 5 back in.
Okay, so we're all good.
So you need a
I
motion
mean, that's a
for
new
these
plan,
changes?
let's give her everything we can.
All right, so then we would need a motion.
So I'll make a motion
Well,
to
let's get the
approve
number, so
budget
let's get rid of the
reductions
51 to
of
84,706.
the outlined budget reductions in this, I don't know, do I have to say each one of them?
No, we can just put a number.
Totaling $84,706. No, that isn't, because this doesn't exist at this point.
I would prefer you list the
Okay.
budget reductions.
All right, I would make motion to approve budget reductions in water pollution. What are you saying, Carl, with that look?
He's not,
Water pollution by professional services by $1,000, DPW landfill by $3,340, salt and sand line by $4,000, EDC part-time salary $3,120, general government contingency by $50,000. That scares me, that's a lot. General government other, bank fees, $7,500. Town council, $15,000. Beautification, $746, for a total of town cuts of $84,706. And I would end a budget addition to the general government other line, state pension, parentheses, MERS, of $63,000.
You got all that?
Yeah. Want me to say it again, Mary?
Nice.
So that is moved.
Second.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay.
Now, we talk about the big enchiladas.
Now we move on to the capital budget amendments in the funding section. Does everybody have the email that Carl sent out earlier? When did this go out? A couple days ago. About his, the adjustments for the Park and Rec turf replacement, DPW paving, DPW roll-off, and the police department radio project. So there's a total cuts there of 395 in capital cuts. Do we have questions, comments, or concerns about any of these?
Or a motion.
Or a motion? I don't know if anybody wants to talk about anything else, but. Or a motion.
Yeah.
A second?
Second.
I'm sorry, who made the motion?
Chris?
Yep.
Carrie seconded. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained?
So do we,
Okay.
so this is just the math, we don't have
That's
to
just
do
the math.
anything with that.
Because you have, right, Mary's got all the cuts anyways.
Yes.
All right. Okay, anything else we need to deal with?
The
135.
the ones in the box need to now be,
Yes.
to be funded from fund balance at those dollar amounts.
So, then the motion is to,
The motion would be to have a portion of the fire apparatus reserve funded out of undesignated fund balance by $159,000. For the fire department personal protective equipment at $41,000 to come out of undesignated fund balance. $400,000 for public works paving to come out of undesignated fund balance. $125,000 for assessor reval to come out of fund balance, and $40,000 for the planning and zoning commission's plan of conservation and development to come out of undesignated fund balance instead of taxation.
I make that motion.
second?
Second.
Any discussion?
What about your 135?
That's gone down the windmill, I understand, I'm gonna have to do it.
You had to poke the bear. Any other discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Do we
And
need to
thank
deal
you,
with the
Carl.
135 now or no? No?
No, the
Appropriation.
135, you already appropriated.
So that's included in the bottom, okay.
That's it.
Carl, thank you.
Do we need to, no, we need to,
Diligence here.
this is for tonight as well, though, right?
Yes.
All right, so hang on,
You're
we're not
done
done.
with the board of ed.
Oh, don't you- Can you, did you just say, did you just say, she didn't say a word, can you stop? Add the numbers up.
Yes, I'm at.
Hang on, we just gotta get the final numbers. Okay.
What's this now?
So this is, we'll look for a motion, now this is what's gonna, we're gonna recommend then on this motion, then this will go to public hearing. So that's what this will be for. So we'll make looking for a motion to recommend an education budget for fiscal year.
We haven't talked about it yet.
We haven't even talked about that.
You wanna talk, oh,
We're
okay,
gonna talk about the education budget.
Okay.
Yeah, right.
Just do the second one, the town.
then let me do the second, one. Okay, town one first. So the first one on the town is to recommend a town budget for fiscal year July 1st, 2023 to June 30, 2024, in the amount of $23,438,078 to send to public hearing to be held on April 5th, 2023 at 6 PM. Motion?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Thank you. Okay. Table's open for Board of Ed.
What I had asked for the last meeting was an understanding of where we're looking at this year's budget, for 8 months anyway, and can we somehow project out what the budget's gonna look like at the end of the year? And as I remember, Mary Ann, you said it was gonna be about a 1.5% surplus possibly. Does that sound right?
Yes, so I sent,
Oh, is it-
Jerry an update on some answers, so it should be on.
I got this, okay.
It's right in the middle.
Everybody got
The
it.
second thing,
Gotcha.
where we think, there are still things
Oh,
changing, something
we-
came up today, so.
If we could tell the future, we'd all be rich.
But that's where we expect we will, yeah,
Okay. And that's the 500 or 1.45%?
out of operating, yeah,
Oh, okay.
as of.
I've always appreciated Mary Ann's budgeting because it's been very conservative. And just because there is a surplus doesn't mean they have to spend it. She habitually gives it back to the town. The fact that we're looking for 8 months down the road of possibly a surplus of 500,000, is there a chance we can start to reduce that increase by a percentage of the $500,000? I would suggest not necessarily a 1.45% budget decrease, but a 1% decrease over about $350,000.
Decrease,
A suggestion,
So you're,
decrease their increase by,
by 350,000.
so you're looking for a Board of Education adjustment of 350?
right.
So when they asked for $890,000 more, you're saying take 350 from that? Well, that's equivalent to what the town is losing. And that's because their budget is twice what ours is. That seems fair that they shoulder part of the weight of bringing budget forward that the town can support.
So that'll still give them an increase of $540,000. And they're saying that they're gonna have an increase at the end of this year, possible, of 500. So in the long run, they'll have $1 million more than what they had at the end of this year. That doesn't seem unreasonable.
There's a question, what happens at the end of this fiscal year with the 500,000 if there is an excess? Does it flow
They
over the next
they
year?
give it back.
Goes into the.
It goes into the undesignated.
It goes
fund.
into,
Right.
yeah, it goes into the
Money
undesignated
is not like
surplus.
capital dollars that can live year to year. Their money exists till 6:30, and if it isn't spent, it goes away. There's no rollover.
So I just need to understand what you're saying. So with the fact that you're anticipating a surplus for this year that's
Right
coming
now.
up,
Right now, yeah.
the end 6:30, you're saying that we should adjust next year's budget down? Is that what we're
A
saying?
little bit, yeah.
Not
Yeah, not
their
the whole
budget,
thing.
not their
Right.
budget, the
Just the excess,
increase.
yeah.
It's just the,
Requested increase.
and where would that come from?
That's a question I'd like to ask.
That's up to them.
Can we ask that?
From tax dollars.
Yeah, but then you'd have to ask.
No, but they're-
the BOE.
No, we don't get to ask that. We can only make a blanket,
I see.
That's a statute.
that's it.
What-
We can't
what-
itemize.
Did you say 350?
Yeah.
Just, okay.
350, so from capital,
No,
No, that's,
no.
Just from their operating budget,
operating, okay.
which is, go ahead, somebody, I thought I heard somebody, but it was, someone said it was $890,000,
Yeah.
is that what you said? The increase
The proposed
to their
budget
to their operating budget
Operating.
this year is gonna be increased.
And
So-
yet, the enrollment is going down by 70
So-
students.
I can't do that
So what
math.
we're saying is, you take 350 from their 890 request of an increase, they'll get $500,000 more than what they got right now
Right.
in this present budget,
There are no
which is
cuts.
already gonna have maybe a $500,000 surplus. So if you look at it, going into next year, they would have an extra $1 million.
Well, that's assuming that, no.
Sure.
It's 500.
that's their estimating.
Well,
Because they don't
No.
take the 500 from this year to next year.
So they have the same as you.
Right.
No, but their budget's there already.
Yeah, okay.
Their budget's there.
But that's, you're right, it's $1 million, but
Right.
you're not.
Their
taking
budget,
this
and
out.
it's like they were saying before on the town side. Every time you keep increasing that educational budget, you can never decrease it. remember, MBR or whatever, you can never bring it down below again what it was. So every time you increase the Board of Education budget, it continues. You're increasing their surplus every year, is what you're really doing.
Yeah, so.
We're not taking.
We're not taking nothing away
Yeah,
from them.
the way I look at it is you asked them to go 2.59% back in
No,
September.
what the decision of the town council was to please bring in a budget that was no greater than 2.5 across the
2.5,
board.
and they came in
Across the
2.59,
board.
yeah.
That
And
doesn't
was-
mean go and increase your budget by 2.5%.
Don't go more than that.
And they did doing a good job, because they came the closest to anybody.
But that's not the basis that we're operating this discussion from.
Right, because what you're saying is the 2.5 was off their budget, but their actuals are coming in lower. So if you went 2.5% off their actual expenditures this year, it would be a lower number, and it would be something like you're saying. Or
Absolutely.
another way to look at it is if you take 350 back, I bet you that gets you back to around 2.5.
They're not at 2.5, they're below 2.5. They're at 1 point something.
Oh.
But that's not the aspect that I'm looking at. I'm looking at a total budget number that is, I mean, last year, they were apparently, and nobody's gonna like this language, but apparently overfunded by they gave back $735,000. But, because that's not the way you look at the funding that they received, you start at what they were given for last year, and you add on to that. That's how the budget process works. So they started at what they received last year, and they have added $894,000 onto that. So, in my opinion, if there was ever a year to look at the state statute that says, and in light of the fact that they're losing 70 students this year, I mean, that's a good sized proportion of their population. That's like 3% of the population. Actually, it's more. I think it's 4%. The town council could tell the Board of Education, we're going to keep you at the minimum budget requirement, which means we will give them exactly what they received last year, which they couldn't, despite all their expenditures, they could not spend $700,000 of that money. The money that they didn't spend, they labeled as having come from salaries and benefits, and so it was an overfunded budget to begin with. So if we went with the minimum budget requirement, they would receive exactly what they received this year. But they have 5 fewer teachers this year, they have 70 fewer students, so logic might interfere here and say, I think they could do it. And not only does minimum budget say you can hold them at last year's figure, but the statute says that you can actually decrease that number by the number of students that are missing times 0.5. So, when you break down the Board of Education budget per student, it's like, I don't know, $20,000 or so. You could reduce $10,000 per 70 kids that aren't there. But we would never do that. We'd never go that far. But I don't think curtailing a budget, if they were $700,000 under in spending last year and they're asking $894,000 more this year, there's $1.6 million in flux there. I get it. I look at their budget, I see the numbers, I see how it's allocated, I see what their predictions are, but I also know that last Wednesday there were 502 cars in the food bank line last Wednesday. 502 cars. I heard that from a volunteer who was working there. Clinton is not in the... I mean, we have to work effectively with every dollar that we have. Just because they came in at a number that we asked for, yes, that's gracious, and yes, that is considerate of the proposal that was generously put out there. But that doesn't mean we have to say yes because it's at that figure. We have to think and determine what can we do to keep taxpayers happy and the school system moving forward. So if we kept them at their budget, last year's budget, but, you know, I would not do that. I would not do the minimum budget requirement because that seems punitive. But keep them to a figure above that. Well, the figure that Tom proposed seemed reasonable to me. Would seem like it would take taxpayers' considerations in mind also. So so their budget increase per request, their increase request is 894. What did you say, Tom, 350?
Yes.
If you took 350 out, so that's 544. That would seem like a very neutral and non-hurtful increase to a budget that is decreasing radically by the number of recipients of this institution. I mean, you're going, okay, so it's 70 students this coming year, 23-24, and then the year after that, they're losing another 33 students. So, you know, to me, it just seems like we're cutting drastically needed items on the town side which benefits every last 13,000 person in Clinton. To ask the same of the Board of Education does not seem out of line. Their budget is twice what ours is. They, you know, you heard the discussion about why they have this, you know, all the administrators that they've ever had, they're not looking at cutting those, but they are cutting teachers because the enrollment is going down. I'm sorry, that argument kind of doesn't float for me, but I like Tom's idea. I think asking the increase request to be lowered by 350 is not out of line at all. As a matter of fact, if it was me doing it, I would have asked to decrease it by 500 and let them get almost a $400,000 raise instead of a $500,000 raise.
I find this conversation 5 months too late,
Why?
because we asked them to come in at 2.5,
That,
and that's our word.
no, it's
That's-
not a word.
It's what we
It's a
asked them.
suggestion.
them to do.
It's what we asked them, and now we say, go back to the drawing board.
Well-
5
Carrie.
months later, after the work they put into it, I find this a problem with timing. Maybe we do this next year.
Carrie, do you recall the discussion that, I mean, at that
I
point, I
recall a
was
lot of
very
discussions.
clear about
I recall you
my
not wanting
feelings
that,
on
but
this.
we did agree to 2.5.
But that doesn't, that was the maximum. That wasn't a please come in at 2.5,
And the town
go
didn't
out
come
and do
in at
whatever
that.
you want.
The town did not come in on that.
The number, like, you can't have both arguments. You can't say 2.5 is the maximum. That was really not a number. You wanted 0, some other people said, you know, higher numbers, and we said, all right, that's a bogey, a number. It was not a maximum, wasn't a minimum. It's a general idea
was a
of
direction.
an increase in operating income. And I think the argument is flawed on what you gave back last year has anything to do with this year. You know, every budget year is different, and we've already said, like, you could have one student come in from outside, and that's $100,000 in expenses. So the numbers are different from year to year. Yeah, they gave back money, but you can't just translate that to the next year and say, because they gave back this much money, we're gonna ask them to take that off of next year's budgets. They're two different budgets.
I'm not asking them to take anything from last year off of this year. I'm just asking for a reasonable outlook at this year. When the number of teachers are declining, the number of students are declining, the ability to pay is declining on the part of the taxpayers of the town of Clinton, because now a dozen eggs is $6 instead of $3, and that's a very real expense. I'm just asking for reasonableness to reflect the state of the school system. How can they be increasing salaries to the level that are listed in here when they are letting Mary Ann said there are 5
Decreasing.
teachers that are leaving, and this shows me that 2 teachers are leaving.
Salaries are decreasing by 0.5%. certified salaries. Non-certified salaries, I mean, that is part of union, so,
All right, well, we each have our opinion. You know mine.
Simple system. Move the motion, if you're gonna make a motion.
I made a suggestion.
Well, is it a motion or a suggestion?
I'll move a reduction of 350,000 to the existing budget.
A second motion.
Any discussion? No other comments?
I disagree with that, but I'll just vote against it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that passes 4-2.
And then let the
Did you vote
taxpayers
aye?
decide.
Did you vote aye?
That's how it goes.
Vote aye.
Yeah,
Oh, I didn't hear you. I didn't see it. I didn't see it.
I made the motion.
Tell me what the vote was, I'm sorry.
Chesky voted.
4-2. No, we need
Thank
more.
you.
Give what money back, Kathy?
Just, well, I just
All
thought.
right, whoa. You,
Yeah, okay, yep.
you want to talk after? We're not
Okay.
doing this here.
Our work here is done.
I'm sorry, I missed
Okay,
it.
so on the Board of Education side, there's a motion to recommend an education budget for the fiscal year July 1st, 2023 to June 30, 2024, in the amount of $38,572,877 to send to public hearing to be held April 5th, 2023 at 6 p.m.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
any discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstained? Okay. Good? Let me know you're done. That's it. All right, that's it. Thank you.